Yes, Tom.
Well, two things there. I'm sorry,
That's okay.
I'm getting sleepy, so I missed the part there, so I apologize for it. The fact that it was Judah there, I believe that was a key point in when the line switched from what would have been Reuben, who was the firstborn, to Judah, because it was his cry that opened up this heart of Joseph. But second of all, in chapter 45, verse 1, cause every man to go out from me. This is the day of the Lord.
Yes. Good.
And they're seeing him whom they pierced, and we are caught up to meet him. We're gone.
Right. Yeah.
This is between me and them.
Wow. Beautiful. I love that. I love that. Yes, the Gentiles and the Jews that have been faithful, look, they're out of here. This is so personal. This is such a family affair that I don't want anyone else around. This is so sensitive, a reconciliation. This is so holy. A reconciliation that it is not to be tampered with. And that reminds me of the thing I forgot way back when I had that kind of look on my face. And that is that when you approach the relationship of God and Israel, Yeshua and Israel, you are walking on holy ground. It is a burning bush. You're looking into something that, thank God you're looking at it, number one. But you need to take off your shoes because you're on holy ground, and you must not try to figure it out by your own understanding. That's what I think, see the shoes coming off as. You're on holy ground. Do not try to figure this out or approach this in your humanity or some analysis or anything like this. Is too holy and too private, but so important and for the public good of a relationship. That is very important and very holy. So Joseph could not restrain himself. They had this incredible reconciliation. Verse 5, he says, don't be grieved. He's forgiving them. Don't be grieved or angry with yourself because you sold me here. For God sent me before you. Why? To preserve life. Yeshua is saying, look, don't stop beating yourself. Jews like to do that, though. I remember a pastor friend of mine told me, he said, Mark, you suffer from what I call the Jewish Catholic fundamentalist syndrome. You always feel like you have something to atone for. Question? Go ahead.
Well, well, maybe I should wait. But there's a person missing in this, so in the family discussion here.
There's a person missing?
Yeah.
Who's that?
Well, going way back, I mean, Jacob, he deceived Laban, and he deceived Esau before that, and deceived his own father, and he paid the price of at least 20 years before he would see Joseph again, and his brothers deceived him still, he lived under that lie of not knowing where Joseph was for at least 20 years.
Yes.
And the issue of, when we talk about Benjamin and the 5 times of, Joseph was Jesus. God was testing their hearts to see if they had understood the issue of the particularity of God. That have they understood this issue of I have the right to favor whomever I will, one brother over the rest of you. And it appears they passed the test. They didn't say a word about food. Right now, it's silent. Maybe that's where we are in silence. But then at this point, what I'm saying is the consideration of the Father, is really what Joseph wanted. He wanted to see if they really had a heart for Jesus. It was at this point that when he finally saw, I can't bear to see what it'll do to my father. If I have to go back, what it'll do to my father. And then when he does see his father, he fell on her shoulders and wept. Wow.
Sure. And that's how the story goes on. We're still in chapter 45. He keeps explaining what, Joseph's explaining, verse 7, God sent me before you to preserve a posterity. A remnant is the word also, for you in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh, and Lord of all his house, and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. It sounds like he's saying, yeah, I have the title of number 2 God, but I'm really number 1. I'm really the mover and shaker here. But he is identifying himself as, I've been the Lord of the Gentiles for a time here, but it's been for the sake of preserving a posterity, preserving a remnant, and of course that's what's happening right now. And then of course, verse 14, then he fell on his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept on his neck. Moreover, he kissed all his brothers and wept over them, and after that his brothers talked. Whew. You think Yeshua and the Jewish people are going to have a few words? As he opened to us the word of God, didn't our hearts burn within us? Oh boy! And a lot of our Jewish brothers they have a good capacity to be very loquacious. They have lots of words, and I think they're going to be listening as much as they're going to be talking. So, I think that's what I wanted to cover as far as the narrative. I have one more part. How much time do I have, Phil? 2 more hours. You have a half hour?
Yeah.
Okay. This whole issue two issues. Two issues I want to deal with you on: betrayal and withdrawing. I did some word study on the word betray. Got my, we have that, what's that great dictionary, 1822, the Webster, the really great dictionary to have that really gives you a rich variety of older meanings. The word betray is from a Norman word, trahir, to draw in, to betray. Part of the word traitor comes out of it, traitri. There's another word, trahir, that morphs into, changes into trahison, which means at least treason. There's another root word, traho, T-R-A-H-O, which means to draw aside, to withdraw, to lead away. Which then also, Webster said, agrees with the Danish, betrager, to deceive and treachery. In strictness, Webster says this word means to fail in duty, to be guilty of a breach of trust, to violate the confidence reposed. The word does not in itself import to deliver up, mean to deliver up, as we think about it. But by usage, either with or without the word enemies, it signifies to deliver up, in breach of trust. One of the first definitions of betray is to deliver into the hand of an enemy by treachery or fraud, in violation of trust, as an officer betrayed the city. And from Matthew 17:22, it says, the Son of Man shall be betrayed or delivered up into the hands of men. Another meaning of betray is to violate by fraud or unfaithfulness, as to betray a trust. Number 3, to violate confidence by disclosing a secret or that which was entrusted, to expose, followed by that person or thing, as my friend betrayed me or betrayed the secret. A fourth meaning, to disclose or permit to appear what is intended to be kept secret, or what prudence would normally conceal. Something betrayed him or betrayed something that was supposed to be kept quiet. Number 5, to mislead or expose to inconvenience not foreseen, as great confidence betrays a man into errors. Having been cocky really betrays you and leads you into all sorts of ruin. And then the final meaning, to betray, is to show or to discover, to indicate what is not obvious at first view or would otherwise be concealed. And there's actually a seventh meaning, to fail or deceive. The word betrayed means to delivered up in breach of trust, violated by unfaithfulness, exposed by breach of confidence, disclosed contrary to expectation or intention, made known, discovered. The word betrayer is, of course, one who betrays, a traitor. And then the act of betraying is delivering up treacherously, violating allegiance or faith pledged by betraying a trust, faithlessly, and to use a fancy word, perfidiously, which means to violating good faith or vows, false to trust or confidence reposed, violating confidence, disclosing contrary to intention, exposing, discovering. I didn't mean to drown you in all that, but I just wanted you to get the weight of this rich word and how we should understand it and see the dynamic here that I think has everything to do with this great drama that we're dealing with, which unfortunately has a lot to do with betrayal. I have something from a statement here. This is a quote from Karl Barth, the Swiss theologian. I referred to it the other day in my talk. But the parallels, this is my little intro, the parallels and implications of both betrayals involving Joseph and Yeshua have much to do with this quote from Karl Barth. Here it goes. Israel's mission must be understood as a mission fulfilled, revealed, and accomplished in Jesus Christ. Hence, it is in the first place hidden and ineffective. What he means, I think, is right now it's not obvious. Israel's mission is to be fulfilled, revealed, and accomplished in Jesus Christ, but obviously it's not working very well right now. It's hidden, it's ineffective. In fact, Barth says, if we read the Old Testament as it speaks itself, then at the first glance, almost on every page, we can be convinced that it does not dream of exalting Israel as such, this nation or even this race of people. The picture which the Old Testament itself gives of the Israelite is in an utterly shattering way that of the man who resists his own election and consequently the mission given him, who proves himself unworthy and incapable of the mission, and who, in consequence, since he is the object of God's grace, is continually struck down and broken by the judgment which afflicts him just because he withdraws from grace. So you see, if grace is on the Jewish people and they're resisting their election, and since they are the object of God's grace, they're even more struck down and broken because they're withdrawing from the very grace that's meant to bless them. Now here's some of my thoughts. Both Joseph and Yeshua, singularly favored of their fathers as being the sons of their old age, have brothers who have resisted their own election and withdrawn from the grace offered them because they did not want to acknowledge and bow down to the specific medium of that grace. Thus, in their blinding pride, they were willing to betray their own calling and election, and in the process betray the very one who was sent as a very visible sign of the Father's love, both Joseph and Yeshua. They were very willing and daring in dishing out the betrayal, and in God's wisdom and judgment, they did taste and will have to taste the most bitter and troubling of betrayals themselves. Joseph's brothers betrayed him into the hands of the Gentiles, and Joseph cleverly requited them or paid them back by sneaking his silver cup into Benjamin's sack as the brothers returned home to Jacob after a night of feasting and drinking with the then unknown Joseph. Yeshua's brothers betrayed him into the hands of the Gentiles to become their ruler, and then Yeshua in the future will requite them when he allows their descendants to be cruelly betrayed by the Gentile man of sin, the beast. In both situations, man planned and plotted. God planned and plotted. All the suffering, all the betrayal ended up for good, because both Joseph and Yeshua confess that my life is not about me. God sold me. He purposed it. My suffering is not about me. It is for a much greater cause. Before you meant it for something, God meant it for something. And this is an attitude that I think, these are the words, by the way, of my pastor, Greg Lawhorn, in a sermon that he gave not too long ago about Joseph. Very astute, very wise.
Excuse me, brother. Would you repeat, please?
The last words?
Last
Yep.
one, yes.
My life is not about me. God sold me. He purposed it. God purposed it. My suffering is not about me. It is for a much greater cause. Before you meant it for something, because you did as people, you meant it for something, God meant it for something. And I have out to the side here, and I'm going to be developing this in a moment. It comes to a very important point. God, even Lucifer's betrayal is something that, of course, we know that God is using for his work. But there is a broken marriage between God and his bride, Israel. There is a broken relationship between brothers, Joseph, Yeshua, and their kin. But amidst all of this brokenness, Joseph and Yeshua, Jesus, are free to suffer. They're free to be wrongly accused and still love and serve those betraying brothers. Wow. The depth of character, the depth of reality that these men reached and embraced and lived in. We're going to have to live in those areas. Because again, there's going to be betrayal, deception is going to be so much the name of the game, and we're going to have to be very wise as serpents and harmless as doves, and we're going to have to know who the informers are and who the betraying people are, because they will be out there. But we have to understand how much we've been betrayers of God, of course, before we were saved, and how much we've been brought into his fellowship. All of this whole dynamic will have two beneficial effects. One is that it did in the past bring, and will bring into the future, to them a stabbing awareness that will bring repentance of what they did in betraying the Holy One sent to them. Number two is that it did bring in the past, and will bring into the future, the people into a place of mutuality and intimacy with God that can be obtained in no other place, because God, and here's where it kind of takes off into the stratosphere. I know it was kind of exciting when I saw this the first time. God experienced betrayal by the anointed cherub who covers. You read the section in Ezekiel 28, the magnificent description of Lucifer as the anointed cherub who covers. And part of what I think he was called to cover was mankind himself. And he was given the ability with great music, as Travis was helping me to understand, that he would assist man in his worship of God. I think anointed cherub who covers. Covers means to protect, to nurture. I think he was given the job of helping and encouraging and nourishing mankind. Now remember, Adam and Eve, they were powerful human beings. They were untainted. Adam had creativity, naming the animals. They had, I'm sure their natural, what we call soulish powers, there's nothing, no negative connotation to that. They had some mighty powers. So you had a mighty being, Lucifer, to help them express their mighty powers to subdue and to develop and cultivate the earth. But a problem developed. And God experienced betrayal by the anointed cherub who covers, Lucifer, and God knows what betrayal tastes and feels like on a scale that no one can imagine. It hit me like a ton of bricks that it was an inside job. You know, it's like, okay, we've raised a certain amount of money to cover this convention, and then we find out, oh my goodness, someone stole $2,000 or stole it all. And we thought, who from outside would come while we were sleeping? They came and stole all the money. Immediately we think an outsider. And then we find out it was one of us. Ooh. You're shot, you're stabbed, it tastes so bitter. It was an inside job. It was an inside job. The betrayal that marks what the dynamic that's going on in the universe. This other handout that I've given you, where we have the line of election at the top, and a line of betrayal and opposition to the election. And it's not the greatest graph, but it kind of, if you follow it each section, then the top is always the line of election, and the bottom is always the line of betrayal. And then on the other side, again, the top is the line of election, and the bottom is the opposing entities. And you can see what a line of election there is, and all the great heroes of the faith. And then you can see exactly in opposition all the characters and all the people who in one way, shape, or another, even down to at the end there, notice Sanballat and Tobiah and Haman and all during that time, everyone who ever spoke a word against the election of God, and how there's always this opposition, this line of betrayal. And you'll notice at the beginning of it, I was wondering, I was asking myself, did Lucifer's fall happen before creation or in the garden? And was leaning toward that it happened in the garden, because in Ezekiel 28, God says to him, you were in the garden, you were in Eden. You had this an amazing beauty in there. So it implies, obviously, that he was in there. We don't know how long. And something came up. And it was there that it happened, that the betrayal occurred. We're going to talk about why that happened in just a moment. But this you can look at in your own time. But God knows. That's why Jesus says, your enemies shall be those of your own household. Yes. He knows the household. It was Lucifer was in the household. He really, truly was.
You can't be betrayed by somebody who doesn't love you.
Exactly. It's been a violation of the trust reposed. Right. Exactly. Exactly.
How Jesus loved Judas.
Yes, and there's that theme again of recapitulation of God using archetypes and prototypes that I talked about the other day, where he establishes something in history, and then here it comes again. Here's another showcase. It's happening, and yes, he was just as Lucifer was on the inside, Judas was on the inside. Just as Lucifer was corrupted by the abundance of his trading, had something to do with commerce, something to do with trading of something. We know that Judas was the handler of the purse and was thinking about money and was interested in money. And so we see things over and over again being demonstrated throughout history in a wonderful pageantry that God is laying out for us to see in his word and in history. So God knows betrayal. Jews sold, betrayed Joseph, Yeshua into slavery so that by God's design they would bless the Gentile world. And I raise the question now, this is a little bit of a different direction, but I'm just going to continue this way. Have Gentiles sold, betrayed their Jewish brothers into slavery in Egypt and forgotten about this dreamer? There's a great reconciliation coming, a great revealing of the face of Jewish brothers to Gentiles. For Gentiles, like Joseph and Yeshua's brothers, meant a lot of it for envy and evil. I'm talking about replacement theology. I'm talking about how Jewish people have been treated by so-called Christians for the last 2,000 years. But God has planned it all in order to bring about much good, in order to bring it about as it is this day, maybe the last 3.5 years, this day, this time of reconciliation, of people really forgiving each other and working together, and really acts of self-sacrifice that the world hasn't never seen. The day of healing, of betrayal for the chosen and elect, to save many people alive. This big theme of betrayal, as it relates to Joseph's brothers and the whole line of betrayal that has existed from the beginning, has been replicated and exhibited throughout history based on the archetype, prototype of Lucifer's betrayal, and has to do, this is very important. What Lucifer, I think, this is a theory, I feel strongly in my heart, this has some element of truth. Again, I thank my pastor, Greg Lawhorn, for suggesting this in a sermon, and I kind of worked with it a little bit, that he was raising the whole idea of what we think we're too good for. I'm too good to do a toilet. I'm too good to do that. I'm too do this, whatever it is. I don't want to mess with those people. And this was Lucifer's downfall. He had this amazing beauty, the music. He was told to be a covering angel over man, a creature of dust, a creature that had powers, but was still just a creature of dust. And he thought he was too good for it. And because of that, he refused to drink the cup that the Lord offered him. God usually offers you a cup that asks you to go down beneath someone and serve them, just like you're going to have to do in the time of Jacob's trouble. Lucifer deemed himself too good and too high to do that for mankind, and so we have had the tragic march of pride throughout history that chooses not to submit to God's specific order and the role in that order that he has designed for you. So even though I know we're many strong believers here, we're still going to have to, we're still going to have to come up to that moment of crisis, that fork in the road. Line of betrayal, line of election. I mean, make your calling and election sure. You're going to have to keep doing it day after day after day, and God's going to have to bring it into a real fiery crisis furnace. And like I said the other day, when the brothers are going to have to decide, do I let the Jewish people in and risk my family's life? It's all those very practical, very real things that are going to come, but that's what it's going to be about. And I want to finish up with the idea of withdrawing. And I want to talk about, and this kind of works with this situation. And it has to do, I don't know that we have to turn there, but if I can summarize it correctly, the situation in Galatians, where Peter had been eating with the Gentiles and then stopped. Okay? He withdrew. He pulled away. And Paul condemned him for his hypocrisy. There's something going on there that is very important that I think we've missed, and we've had possibly a wrong emphasis, a wrong interpretation of that, and I want to bring out from some research reading I've done, some of the wisdom of some brothers like Mark Nanos, a Jewish man who's actually an unsaved Jewish man who's written some of the best stuff I've ever read, and Dan Gruber, who is the brother who did the translation of the Messianic writings. Peter withdrew from eating and fellowshipping with Gentiles because they were Gentiles, not over what they were eating. It doesn't ever say that the issue was ever food. And this goes back to Peter and Paul being men who were Jewish. They didn't stop being Jewish. They didn't stop living like Jews. They ate clean food. Peter would eat as a Jew. The Gentiles would eat as Gentiles. There was freedom. There was unity. But Peter was free to live this way because he was a Jew. And it never in that passage ever mentions that the issue was food. The issue was withdrawal. Let me explore that just a little more. What if we take Peter's situation with the Gentile believers in Antioch, mentioned in Galatians, and turn it on its head and look at it from another angle? Paul called Peter a hypocrite for the way he conducted himself when it came to table fellowship with the Gentile brethren. First, he ate with them, but as a Jew, he did not eat the same food as them. He would not. Peter would not, oh, Lord, I've always eaten what's clean. By doing that, he would be demonstrating his belief that, quote, the Gentiles were made righteous by their faith in Messiah and were thereby brought into the commonwealth of Israel. Then, by later withdrawing from table fellowship with the Gentiles, Peter was visibly reversing his position, signifying that uncircumcised Gentiles had never been and could not be acceptable to God. Not over the issue of food, but who they were as Gentiles. In so doing, he condemned himself for having earlier entered into table fellowship with them. He condemned himself by indicating that the wall which divided Jews from Gentiles needed to be rebuilt, whether or not the Gentiles had turned in faith to the God of Israel. Does that connect? That's from an article, an appendix in the Messianic writings that Dan Gruber wrote. So, here's what I suggest, where I take it. What if Gentile believers for the last 2,000 years, having first started out in fellowship with Jewish believers, which they did, which I spoke about is a historical reality, they did, and then having withdrawn from Jewish believers and established separate churches and institutions apart from their intended identification and participation in the Commonwealth of Israel, have acted as the hypocrite by saying that Jews, quote, had never been and could not be acceptable to God. What if Gentiles have for the last 2 millennia been trying to rebuild the wall between themselves and the Commonwealth of Israel and the Jewish people, whether or not Jewish people had turned to faith to the God of Israel? Thus, Gentiles have throughout church history lived by the deceit and lie that they can have any truth or any connection to the God of Israel and the Messiah apart from Israel and the Jewish people, and have done everything in their power to remain separate and establish their own importance and status, not in relational context with Israel, but in as much opposition and distinction as they could generate. Just as Peter was wrong, the Gentile believers have been wrong, and someone like Paul or myself today or somebody needs to stand up to them, point this out, and call them out on this issue and put an end to it, lest the truth of the everlasting new covenant be totally subverted.
Back to try to establish their own. You could read that little section again, because that was the key.
Say it a little louder.
Try to establish their own, that little section you were just reading.
Yeah.
And there was one section that
Try,
was, that was really
try to establish their own importance and status, not in relational context with Israel, but in as much opposition and distinction as they could generate. I think that's my last word. Men and brethren, they were cut to the heart. It says, men and brethren, what shall we do? Maybe we should just get on our faces right now. I don't know. All of us. I don't know. I don't know.